The 2024 football season is right around the corner. And if you want to know which Steelers to draft to your fantasy football team, we've got a guest today here on the Bleav in Steelers show that'll help you out with that. Before we get to today's guest, today's episode of the Bleav in Steelers show is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. There's player props, over-unders, spreads. If you want to get in on the week one action, BetOnline.ag is the place to do it. You can use our promo code Bleav. You can see that on your screen right now to get started over at betonline.ag. BetOnline, the game starts here. Welcome into the Bleav in Steelers show. My name is Mark Bergin, and very excited to be joined today by Jeff Ratcliffe. He is the president of FTNFantasy.com. You can also hear the Jeff Ratcliffe show on Sirius XM Channel 87. Jeff, first time we've met. Welcome in. Hope you're doing okay today.
Yeah, phenomenal, man. It's a great time of year. I love August. Used to hate August when I was growing up. It's like, summer's over, but means football is here, means fantasy draft season is here. It's a good time to be alive, man.
The feeling is mutual there, where when you're a kid, it's like, school again. And then it's, when you're grown, it's like football season is almost here. It's impossible to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers and not discuss Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. I know it's been talked ad nauseum. I would love to get your perspective, especially from the fantasy perspective. We know what Justin Fields can bring to the table in terms of his legs, but if you read all of the local media reports and you ignore what you see on national TV, it's going to be Russell Wilson to start week one of the season. So it's like, are either of these guys good enough to start for your fantasy team in, say, a 2-quarterback league? Jeff, I'd love to get your perspective here.
Well, I mean, if Justin Fields isn't starting, then the obvious answer is no there. And I know a lot of people did draft him, though, and that's the thing. At this point of the year, the NFL season is a forest. We can see the entire thing, all 17 or 18, but I don't like to play in week 18, all those weeks in front of us, right? Next week, when the season starts, we will no longer be able to see that. The collective we. A lot of people can only see what's about to happen and what just happened. They do not see anything else beyond that. So they just see the trees. They don't see the forest. And when you see the tree of Justin Fields on your bench with 0 points, now hopefully he is on your bench, but still with 0 points, people will start to wonder. And I think there was that expectation that he was going to be out there, especially because Wilson missed all of that time in camp and Fields was getting all those reps. But that also is very telling. He got all those reps and was still not able to impress enough to surpass Russell Wilson on that depth chart. A lot of coaches will subscribe to that mentality of you don't lose your spot due to injury, even though he kind of really never had a spot, all coming into this quarterback room together. But Fields didn't do enough. And sometimes fantasy players will put their fingers in their ears, do that old Jim Carrey from Dumb and Dumber routine where they just go, la, 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 and I don't want to hear what you're saying. This guy could have been a starter. The Raiders were desperate for a starter. They have no starter. They have none. No starter whatsoever. And they weren't in the sweepstakes here. There was no sweepstakes. It was a 4th-round pick. It was nothing. It was peanuts. I think the league told us something there without directly saying he's not at this point starter caliber. Now, it doesn't mean he can't revitalize his career. We saw Baker Mayfield do it. We've seen Geno Smith do it. Maybe all we got to do is get Justin Fields with Dave Canales, and that'll change the ball game. But for the future, let's foreshadow that. But regardless, Russell Wilson, is he startable in 2-quarterback leagues? No. Could he be over the long term? Possibly. I do like the throw he made to George Pickens. Now, we saw two passes out of him this past week, but I like the throw he made. I do not like the offensive line play. I also, and I'm sure this topic is going to come up, I am not an Arthurth Smith hater. I know that's like the fun thing to do. Everybody wants to poke fun. He had offensive teams. They were not good the last few years, and they were still 7-win teams.
Let me piggyback off that too. 3 consecutive years of 7-10 football in Atlanta. But I look at the first-round picks where it's, Bijan in the backfield, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, first-round talent. And it's like, where does that come to fruition? In Arthurth Smith's defense, I would say, who's his quarterbacks? Who are his quarterbacks in Atlanta? Which is why they go out and get Kirk Cousins. But I expect a lot of play action this year with this Steelers offense and Arthurth Smith, something that from a Pittsburgh standpoint, in terms of just the pure football, we haven't seen in years with Matt Canada and company. It's been it's been a putrid offense, Jeff, the last several seasons from the Pittsburgh standpoint.
It's been vanilla, that's for sure.
You're
I do
polite.
think there's some revisionist history, though, with the usage of these guys. Drake London has had 2 very nice seasons to start his career out, despite the quarterback woes. Bijan Robinson had almost 1,500 scrimmage yards last year. Like, people are forgetting that it was actually a very good season. It wasn't a Madden video game season for fantasy purposes. And by the way, Kyle Pitts in his rookie season, when he actually had, now granted, very late career Matt Ryan, but a capable quarterback, had a 1,000-yard season as a rookie tight end. Only Dick had done that before. So I don't know if I'm subscribing to all of that. I just think that sometimes with fantasy managers, the expectations are so lofty that it's impossible for the reality to meet them. If you draft a player at his ceiling, chances are you're going to be disappointed. If you're drafting him at the very top, and this is to anybody listening right now, I love Marvin Harrison Jr. I love Malik Neighbors, but we are drafting these dudes at their ceiling. Could they hit it? Sure, it's within the range of possibility, but history says probably not. History says maybe Rome Odunze is the better draft option this year, or go a little bit further down to the Ladd McConkeys, Brian Thomases, those guys like that, as opposed to, getting these guys at their ceiling. But yeah, I think with Pittsburgh, it should be more entertaining given the quarterback situation. Because let's face it, I mean, whether it's Fields or Wilson, and it could be both over the course of the season, they're both an upgrade on what was there last year. Not a knock to Mason Rudolph. I like Mason Rudolph. Kenny Pickett, come on. I mean, this is Mitch Trubisky, come on. This is a big upgrade, both of those guys. And for the fact that they're paying them peanuts, I mean, that just makes it even better. You have these basically 1-year auditions for both of these guys for the future, and they're paying nothing to do it.
Yeah, less than $5 million combined for the two. Tells you everything you need to know right there. And great contractual value. It's almost like you get what you pay for, though, because it's like my brain works this way, where it's like, regardless of which guy you would start, by like mid-October, it just feels to me that they're going to turn things over. If they're going to start with Wilson, that they'll turn it over to Fields. If the season goes south or even sideways, I think you have to turn over all of your rocks to see what you have of which guy potentially you could bring back beyond this season, because then Pittsburgh's got to do it all over again at the quarterback position next offseason.
And next year's draft class, I mean, there's interesting names in next year's draft class, but it's not going to be as top heavy. I mean, well, this was historically top heavy. Whether they all deserve to be top 12 picks or not, all 6 of those guys, I think that's a moot point, because the league said they were top 12 picks. Whether we draft nicks or people who just casual fans say it's true, it was true. And I don't think we're going to see that next year. We have this major youth movement in the league. Like, Russ is an elder statesman now, which is kind of weird to think of. But the open jobs, there aren't as many, and granted, maybe some of these rookies don't perform up to snuff. That happens every single year. Maybe, somebody like Bryce Young doesn't turn a corner after last year's lackluster performance, but they could be one of the few teams in the market if neither one of these guys hit, which maybe is to the advantage. There's still going to be interesting players in next year's class. We're going to have a very experienced, possibly the most experienced college quarterback of all time. If Dylan Gabriel plays the whole season, he will break Bo Nix's record of 61 starts, which...
It's a lot of football, though. That's a lot of football, a lot of game experience. Yeah.
I made this mistake with Brock Purdy. Now, I think a lot of people made the mistake with Brock Purdy, but I underestimated the importance of being a 4-year starter. And Bo Nix is now a 5-year starter. But Purdy, all of those reps, it's truly impossible to simulate the in-game reps. Like, you can practice, you can work on situations, you can work on execution, all of those different things. But there's just something different when you're on the field in an actual game. And I guess everybody undersold Brock Purdy for what he's been doing, but I did make a note. Whenever I go through draft prospects now at the quarterback position, I'm always going to look at that experience factor. It's not the only thing, of course, but it does have to be a part of the equation.
Yeah, all the people that will watch this or listen to this, they'll be like, well, that didn't really pan out for Kenny Pickett, who's fighting for QB2. Over in Philly.
It was the hand size. That's what it was. It was the hand size all along.
Yeah, that's the only thing. We mentioned some about Arthurth Smith. What kind of impact do you think that he'll have on this Steelers offense this coming season?
Well, I mean, he's bringing his variation of the now widespread. I call it the Shanahan Kubiak, but we could also call it, go to the next generation Shanahan McVay. He runs it a little bit different than a lot of other, a lot of these other guys do. But one thing we saw last year that he did extremely effective, even though fantasy managers didn't like it, was the backfield, using those guys in tandem with each other. And let's face it, man, the Steelers have a really good backfield. I mean, those two guys together, that is one of the top tandems in the league right now. You have the explosive ability with Warren. He showed he can carry the ball a little bit more than maybe we expected last season. And then Najee, I think Najee is one of the most underappreciated, maybe players in the NFL, but certainly running backs in the NFL. He has yet to miss a game. He is 1,000 plus every season. He goes 10 total, 8 total touchdowns over the course of his 3 years. He's one of those guys that if you put out there, no name associated, you put those stats out there and you said, would you take this player? I don't think anybody would say no. Like automatically, of course we would. He's just not flashy. And that's fine. It doesn't always have to be sexy with everything. So I think Arthur Smith can use him effectively as well. The one concern that we've had in the preseason is the usage at tight end. I mean, they do have, they have options there, but the expectation for fantasy folks was, oh, Pat Freiermuth, baby, Pat Freiermuth. And then we see the usage and it's like, he's getting the arty party,
though.
The
it's
rotation.
Preseason though.
It is preseason. You can get an indication of usage, though. I mean, they may not be flashing plays specifically, but they're going to flash personnel. And that's the one concern. The nice thing, though, and this is not a good thing for the Steelers, but whoever is the assumption is that Freiermuth is the top pass catching option among the tight ends. There are not a lot of targets on this offense. Like we have Pickens and maybe something happens here. I mean, I've been keeping my eye out. I said, when we hear John Mechie's name thrown out there for a possible trade, or even Tim Patrick, who I think Tim Patrick's a nice player. He's just didn't quite fit what Sean Payton wants to do, it looks like. But do any of those guys land there? Maybe you're coming back around, listening to this after the fact, watching this after the fact, and you're like, duh, that obviously happened. But, they got to add something here. Van Jefferson, I mean...
You just manifested it. Jeff, you just manifested it. It's the podcaster's curse where as soon as we post this episode, the news will break of whatever the Steelers are doing at wide receiver too.
So there's a podcaster's curse and there's also a projector's curse. So I will do a whole run of projections at ftmfantasy.com. And as soon as I post them, either somebody will be suspended, hurt, and then everything goes sideways. And it's like, well, what do I do now? Yep. It's a real thing, people. It's a real thing.
Yeah. The running backs, the only concern I have with Jaylen Warren, who I absolutely love, coming into the year with a hamstring injury. Missed the last preseason game. We'll see if he's ready to go week 1. I'd rather sit him a week or two to start the season and make sure hamstring is rested and recovered versus going into the year where that is a lingering issue. And you mentioned Najee Harris. I'll add some gasoline to that fire. The psychological factor of not picking up his 5th-year extension for the 2025 season. He's in a contract season now. So what that does to him, he stays healthy. He doesn't fumble the ball either. So he's been a chain mover, not maybe quite what you would hope with the first-round pick in selecting him. But then again, I point to, and this isn't to make excuses, this is just reality. What's his offensive line been like for the first 3 years of his career? And show me another running back who would have that same level of production given the struggles to create holes up front. And so it's like, that's just the reality. I'm expecting a big season from Najee Harris. If you had to choose between the two, I'm assuming with the touchdowns, you'd go Najee. But how do you break this down from a fantasy standpoint between Harris and Warren, at least in terms of statistical production from the fantasy football standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, it's a ceiling floor argument for sure. Higher floor out of Harris, higher ceiling out of Warren. Now, the problem with a higher ceiling player is week over week, you have more volatility, right? There could be low down weeks and then weeks where he's a top 5 fantasy option. Like that wouldn't surprise anybody. He has the capability with his big play upside. So I think if you're a fantasy manager and you enjoy consistency, then that's probably not the direction for you. If you want that bang for your buck and you're willing to weather the storm of down weeks, then yeah, Warren is a fine option. Now, one thing I will warn against, and this is, I hear these these sort of age-old, recycled, problematic thoughts from fantasy managers year in and year out. And here's one. I drafted them both to lock up the points in the backfield, right? Well, you didn't lock up the points in the backfield. What you did is you created for yourself a weekly start-sit conundrum where you're probably only going to be using one of those guys, because using both of them, that feels really problematic. And if you're anything like me, you're going to make the wrong decision every single week. And then psychologically, you're going to be upset by that, which is going to cause you to make further bad decisions, and it becomes this self-perpetuating machine. So my advice, and this isn't just this backfield, it could be Tennessee, where you have Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears. There are a few other backfields like this. Pick one and stick to the one. So if you drafted Najee, then you're not going to draft Jaylen Warren because he's going a little bit after. If you missed on Najee, then sure, go after Warren. I don't mind either of those guys. They really both represent really good value right now. I just wouldn't want both on the same roster.
Makes total sense, just given the overall struggles of the offense, where this is far from a top 5 offense in the league. So that analysis makes total sense to me. We got to talk about my guy, George Pickens, where I feel like they've just been using him with go balls. They say, well, it's not a 50-50 ball with George Pickens. It's a 90-10 ball. Teams are going to be bracketing him, though, because you don't have a guy like, say, Deontay Johnson opposite him. Wide receiver 2 is a question mark. I guess it's Van Jefferson at this standpoint in time. We talked some about Freiermuth getting into the mix with the passing game, something that for whatever reason, injuries is part of it, but the Steelers didn't do a year ago. What are you expecting from George Pickens this year? Because he'll be entering his 3rd year, and then the next year in 2025, final year of his rookie deal. We know the premium that teams have been paying at the receiver position. So George Pickens, 2024, what say you, Jeff Ratcliffe?
Well, he has that motivation, right? Let's get up over 30 million average annual, which now we're seeing more and more. We have our 2nd player in NFL history at wide receiver to top 100 million in total guarantees now, with the CeeDee Lamb deal in place, Justin Jefferson obviously being the other. So there is money to be made for George Pickens. The coverage, it's going to be pretty obvious who the focal point is for defenses here. But I think he can still be just fine in that regard. And the nice thing about him, compared to what we had Arthurth Smith working with last year in Drake London, and I like Drake London, don't get me wrong, he's a very nice receiver, but he doesn't have that explosive playmaking ability that George Pickens does. George Pickens has, he's a freak of nature. He can make very spectacular plays look somewhat routine, which is incredibly difficult to do. So I think, here's where I'm viewing him. I'm viewing him as a wide receiver 3, and that is not a knock. If you're a Steelers fan, that's not like, oh, the disrespect. No, it's acknowledging a wider range of outcomes. It could certainly be, plenty of top 10 weeks for him, but then there are going to be weeks where, maybe he does disappear a little bit in the stat sheet, and that's fine. You're baking that into the overall value. I will say this, though, to the Steelers fans who hopefully didn't turn this thing off just yet. In best ball, my most exposed player, the person I have on more rosters in best ball than anybody else right now, is George Pickens. So I have a vested interest in George Pickens doing well this season. That if he does well, I do well. But I did that because I do Bleav that he offers a lot of bang for your buck, a lot of value in that area. Happy to get him in that range. And I'm glad to see that fantasy drafters didn't overvalue him. When you look at the situation, even if the coverage is tough, even if he's going to see extra attention, he's still kind of the only show in town, and the ball is going to find its way to George Pickens.
Yeah, and rightfully so. When you talk to players, when I talked to my co-host Ike Taylor about this, who scouts for the team, and Ike went up against everybody in the league, and he's like, yeah, George Pickens is an alien. He's a little bit different. That resonates with me, because guys who have seen it all in this league when it comes to talent at the receiver position, that makes me perk up a little bit when they talk about George Pickens. Can you explain what you mean by best ball with your coverage over at FTN Fantasy, Jeff, in terms of what that means of having George Pickens in that categorization?
Sure. So best ball is a different type of game. So most people are used to regular fantasy football, which we refer to as redraft. So you go, you have your draft, maybe even have it in a backyard with a bunch of friends. You put multicolored stickers on a board, maybe eat some good food and drink a couple adult beverages. And then you manage the team through the season, right? You make start-sit decisions, waiver decisions, maybe you make some trades. And the goal is to beat the other 11 teams in a league or other 9 teams, depending on the league size, right? And you win your championship. Well, best ball is a format where you only draft. And then your best lineup each week is automatically just determined by the highest scorers at those set positions. So you draft a roster of 18, but you only have 8 starting spots. Then the highest scorers get automatically put into those starting spots. So you don't have to make start-sit decisions, waiver decisions, trades, nothing. It's just drafting. Now, there are some companies out there like DraftKings, Underdog, who have massive tournaments. So it's not just a 12-team league. You are in that 12-team league, but then there are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of 12-team leagues. And then as you get to the playoffs, all of them are consolidated into one playoff, and ultimately one person will win the entire thing. And it is not for a couple $100 or $1,000. It's for $1 million prizes are now common for that thing. So in Underdog, for example, you can have 150 entries. And when I talk about most exposed, most drafted, I'm talking about, how many rosters did I draft George Pickens, right? And this is something you have to pay attention to. You don't want to have a guy on 100% of your rosters, because if he gets hurt, then he's hurt on 100% of your rosters. So you do control it as good as you can. But I just kept finding myself like, oh, I love George Pickens in this spot. And then you could get the stack. Now I put a lot of my chips on Russell Wilson, but you get Russell Wilson for free because actually people were drafting Justin Fields ahead of him. That could come back to backfire. It's not necessary to have the stack, but either way, like if you're getting a guy in the 17th, 18th round at quarterback, I don't really hate it.
You mentioned not having to sit and start and make those roster decisions. I've been playing the wrong fantasy football all this time, and I didn't even know it.
Well, it does take out the weekly activities, though. So I think it's fun to do everything. The cool part about best ball is we start in March, and it goes straight on through to the start of the season. So if you're really drafting over that span of time, and you can do $5 leagues, one thing you're doing is you're practicing drafting. Like it's a constant feature for a lot of people out there that year in and year out, maybe they're in 2 or 3 home leagues. Those are the only drafts they do. So they never get any better. Often equated to the guy who goes out, plays golf 3 times a year, hacks it around, shoots a 120, maybe like a 120, and never gets any better. Well, they don't practice, right? They're doing the same mistakes over and over and over. So in best ball, like it's a slightly different game for sure, because you don't have all those considerations of waivers, etc. But you have to make decisions in a draft against real opponents. So it gets you so much better there. You also have your finger on the pulse of the ebb and flow of the offseason, where some guys, like I said, for a while, Russell Wilson was ahead of Justin Fields. And then once we got training camp opening up, all of a sudden Justin Fields shot up to like quarterback 25 and Russ slid down to like 33.
And it's I think part of that is like Twitter, where you see some highlights from training camp in Latrobe, and it's like you like what you see in practice. But again, I will say this. I think Justin Fields plays at some point in 2024. When is anybody's guess? And so it's like, what does that look like come week 18? Mike Tomlin doesn't have losing seasons. So it's like, are you fighting for a playoff spot? Is Russell Wilson, who's a 9-time Pro Bowler and a Super Bowl champion in his 13th season, going to be content with holding a clipboard on the bench? Like, how the Steelers handle that quarterback position is going to be one of the most fascinating things to watch. And I'll end here, Jeff, too. I do not think that it's a coincidence at all that the league decides to put NFL Hard Knocks in season to start in December, and also scheduled all of the AFC North games on the back half of the year. That was not a coincidence.
No, it probably wasn't a coincidence that they faced the Falcons in week 1 either. But I mean,
the storylines write themselves.
It is the best right now, for my money, the best division in football. I love the level of talent from all the teams, but I love the rivalries of the AFC North. There's just something about that division that always just does it for me. I'm a little bit maybe a traditionalist at times. I love the evolution of the game. It's not that. I love the history of the game as well. And man, when you think of like Pittsburgh, Cleveland in December, like there's just something about that that's just awesome.
It's the weather. It's just the passion that the fan bases have too. And it's just like the different rivalries it's awesome. It's awesome. We've talked a lot about offense. Got to ask you about the defense. got TJ Watt, Cam Hayward's in the final year of his contract, Minkah Fitzpatrick, hoping to build and kind of rebound off of a season where he didn't have a single takeaway last year, coming off the previous year where he's an all-pro, had 6 interceptions. He's what I would have argued the Steelers' best offensive player in 2022 on defense. How do you see the Steelers' defense in this upcoming season, in the 2024 season?
Well, defense has a lot of talent on it for sure. I'm intrigued by the week 1 matchup. If you're looking at it just from a fantasy standpoint, I'm not a draft your defense and then just go from there. I like to play the matchups each week because really fantasy defense scoring is really antiquated. It's a problematic scoring system that is fully weighted towards touchdowns, which is the most random defensive stat there is. So the way that I try to at least negate that is to go after turnovers. I don't know if Atlanta is the best matchup in week 1. I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what Atlanta does. I years ago worked with Zach Robinson at PFF, and I know Zach as a person and as a football mind, and I'm pretty confident he's going to hit the ground running with that roster. But of course, when you have a quarterback coming back, an older quarterback from an Achilles, who knows? Who knows what that's going to look like? But there will be plenty of weeks where the Steelers will be a top fantasy option. It's just in week 1, I've been looking elsewhere in fantasy drafts. By the way, if you still have a fantasy draft, you're paying attention to this, and you want to draft the Baltimore Ravens, just remember that they open with the Kansas City Chiefs in week 1. Not exactly the best matchup. So don't just blindly draft the top defense and rankings. Maybe take a quick peek. I have an article on this at ftnfantasy.com. Take a quick peek at the week 1 opponents. For example, I just had a draft where I waited till the second to last round, but I drafted New Orleans because they are facing Carolina, and I do think Carolina improves, but I'm not sure they're going to be there in week 1. And that New Orleans defense has a lot of talent on it. So I went after that one as a streamer, then knowing full well, based on a week 2 opponent, that I'm going to have to drop them and move on. But in pretty much any fantasy league out there, you can do that week in and week out.
Yeah, really good stuff there, and a great strategy. It's one that, like, on the back half of fantasy seasons, I really look at where it's like, my defense isn't quite getting it done week in and week out. How can I improve my team? And it's tough with the waiver wire because a guy like, let's say a year ago, Puka Nacua gets scooped up pretty early on, and that makes a huge difference where it's like, well, who knew that a 5th rounder out of BYU was going to amount to anything? No one really knew that. But you mentioned the matchups defensively. It can be a huge component, especially late in the season and late as well when other teams might be resting their starters, say week 17 and on. So that's another facet of that. And the matchups, I think that's very, very wise. And you mentioned the Steelers, the back half of that schedule, second half of the year, it's as tough as any in the league. Yeah. So you really like the Steelers defense, but you're going up against a lot of elite level talent when it comes to, you look at the Steelers second half of the year. I mean, the Chiefs on Christmas Day and then a bunch of division games. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy down the stretch for Pittsburgh.
No, not at all. But the talent is there. You mentioned TJ. We'll see if those rumblings of JJ Watt joining the team at some point. I don't think it happens. But I did see JJ Watt in person a couple weeks ago, and well, he looks like he's in good shape. So let's just say that. But yeah, I mean, hey, the talent. I'm excited to see another year here of Joey Porter's maturation, Joey Porter Jr.'s maturation. A lot of talent with him. Defense, I mean, it's a well put together defense. It is exciting to see that for sure. Obviously, we know the storied history of Steelers defenses over the years. Like I said, the history means a lot to me. And yeah, I'm excited to see this iteration.
You mentioned JJ Watt. I don't, how many people in retirement can squat 405 pounds? I did the math and added up. He had 4 racks on each side, Jeff. It was just like, I know he is a massive human, future first ballot Hall of Famer, but it's like, wait a second. I thought this guy was done playing, and I'm sure he could still do that no problem.
Well, yeah, he's technically sort of my colleague. He's on the show across the hall from me at CBS. He's on the big show. I'm on the JV, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, on CBS Sports Network on Sunday mornings out of the pregame show. But yeah, he, like I said, he looks like he's in very good shape. You see some of these players when they hit retirement era of their career, even if they're not actually retired, they maybe start to look like more normal, mere mortals. He does not. He still looks like a superhero. And I don't know. He keeps deflecting that question. I've noticed that publicly. But we also know how close of a relationship he has with TJ. Those guys are super close. And it would be fun to see two Watts on the same defense at the same time. Even if it's just a few games, I'd love to see that.
Must-watch TV. And this is no knock. I mean, Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt are as good a duo in the league. And I'm telling you, from what I saw last year as a rookie and in the preseason, what translates over, Nick Herbig in that rotation consistently makes plays off the edge. How you keep him off the field, I don't know, because I don't want to take Highsmith and Watt off the field. If you're Terrell Austin, the Steelers DC, can you maybe design packages where you put all of those players on the field? Or if you say, hey, TJ needs a blow, Alex Highsmith needs a blow, you're putting Herbig in there, and he has embarrassed opposing offensive tackles. Going into his second year, every opportunity he's made when he's had the opportunity to make plays, he's done it. And he's one of the guys coming out of the preseason. I'm very, very excited for this coming season.
Again, I go back to the secondary too. I think that reciprocal relationship between coverage and pass rush it's such an important one that doesn't get talked about maybe enough in my circle, at least, in the fantasy realm. There's some IDP people out there. I'm not an IDP person myself who play with actual individual defensive players, but still, for me, I always say fantasy football is my excuse to talk about football 24/7. And, I'm excited to see what that relationship looks like with TJ. I mean, we saw the beginnings of it last year, and you mentioned how can't keep a guy off the field. Well, that was Porter last year. You just couldn't keep him off the field. You had to find ways to get him out there, and ultimately they did. So yeah, it's going to be a fun year. Definitely.
Absolutely. He is Jeff Ratcliffe. Jeff, if there's anything that you need to promote with your work, please feel free to take the opportunity to do so now.
Yeah, you mentioned the radio show that's on Sirius XM 87, Monday through Friday, 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern. The podcast I do is called The Rant. The website that I am at is called ftnfantasy.com. If you want to sign up, promo code RATPACK gets you 10% off. And I also mentioned that TV show. It's really cool. It's a comprehensive TV show in terms of football discussion. We talk about everything, not just the regular pregame stuff, which we do, but we also talk fantasy and betting on the show as well. That other pregame show, or TOPS for short. Adam Shine is the host. Kyle Long is on the show. Brock Farina is on the show. Jonathan Jones, CBS Insider, is on the show. It's just and then we get, Matt Ryan and JJ Watt and Bill Cowher and all those guys come over as well across the hall. So it's a great show. So check it out if you haven't already on CBS Sports Network.
I got to tell you this story. I've never told this story on a podcast before. In the summer of 2013, I entered at ESPN Radio in Chicago for the Waddle and Sylvie show. And that summer, Kyle Long was a rookie for the Chicago Bears. He was the first round pick that year. He came into the studio. I have never shook someone's hand who had a firmer grip. He could have broken my hand. No problem. No problem. And that's something I'll never forget. Just the heavy hands, something I'll never forget.
Yeah, he's just cool though too. On top of it, he's one of those people that he knows his stuff. Obviously, he's great on TV, but he also, if you know him behind the scenes, I had met him for 5 minutes. The first time I met him, felt like I knew him for 20 years. Just a genuinely good person, really funny, but so knowledgeable. And having that offensive line mindset on the show, that adds a different level. Like you see the game a little differently in the trenches, and I think that really helps. So I think that's really where you kind of have to start to see the game and then take it from there. A lot of fantasy folks, we're looking at the football. We're not looking at what's going on everywhere else in the field, and we forget there's 22 guys on the field. So there's infinitely more than 22 different things happening in any given play. And so to hear his perspectives on the show is really phenomenal.
He is Jeff Ratcliffe. Go follow him and his work. Jeff, I want to thank you for coming on the Bleav in Steelers show. I want to thank today's presenting sponsor, BetOnline.ag. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast on Apple and Spotify, 5 stars only. If you're not already subscribed on YouTube, go and hit that subscribe button. He is Jeff Ratcliffe. I'm Mark Bergin. Get you ready for Steelers and Falcons in week 1 here in the coming weeks. We've got a week off before this all gets going, September the 8th. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care, and so long, everybody.